So you want to learn how to play Union Arena. Well, you've come to the right place. So first of all, you pick your IP. So what does this mean? So you've probably seen some sort of product on your local game store that has your favorite IP, whether that is Nikke, whether that is Bleach, whether that is JJK, Code Geass, or Black Clover. There's probably something for everybody in this game. And what this means is that you can only build a deck with the collection of cards from that IP. So I would usually say for new players, pick the one that you like the most because all IPs are viable. But if you just want to be sure, make sure that all your cards have the same 3 letters here so that they all belong to the same IP. Well, some IPs will have many sets in them, such as Bleach, which has a starter deck, a Volume 1 set, a Volume 2 set, and also a binder set. But some sets, such as Nikke, only has one booster set. So basically, if you see this at your local game store, all you need is contained within these packs. So let's say you open a few packs of Nikke, you will see that you'll be getting cards from 3 different colors. So what this means is that you want to select one color to start building your deck. So let's recap. So your deck should contain one color and you'll need a 50 card deck. You can only have 4 copies of any card. There can be different cards of the same character, but you can only have 4 copies of that exact card. And then you can have 4 copies of any final color or special trigger. If you would like more information on deck building, please click this video here. And also 3 action points. So these cards are not found in your deck. They're basically used to keep track of how many actions you play per turn. Now, where can I find deck lists? Of course, you can find deck lists on my channel. I'll have pretty much a deck list for every single color of any recent set. You can also find them on Xburst, or you can also find competitive deck lists from events at Eggman events. So let's say you found a deck list, such as this Marion deck, and we're ready to play. So you shuffle up your deck, and now you draw 7, and this will be your first starting hand. So what are we looking for in our first starting hand? We're looking for basically playable cards. So we need at least 1 to 2 zero costs. So zero costs are effectively the number on the upper left corner. That is how much energy you are required to play that card. And unfortunately in our hand, we have no zero costs. So now we need to mulligan. So our entire hand goes to the bottom of the deck and then we take the next 7 on top. So by this manner, you will not be picking up the same cards that you put back. So we hope for a better hand and look here. We actually have some zero costs, such as this Rapi over here. We keep this hand as our starting hand, and we shuffle the remaining deck, and now we place our 7 life. And now we're officially ready to start the game. So the goal of the game is that you win when you hit all your opponent's 7 life. So basically you want to knock out every single card in their life until their final one, and you win when you take out that final life card. So what happens if you're player 1? So player 1 does not draw on turn 1 and he starts with 1 AP, and player 2 draws on his turn 1 and starts with 2 AP. We'll be going over what an AP is next. So let's say you won the die roll and you select to be player 1. So what happens on your first turn? So you have 7 cards, of course you don't draw on turn 1, and you have 1 action point. So officially you're generating 0 energy since you have an empty board, and you elect to play a 0 cost card and remind yourself that cards always come in rested or tapped. And now because you have a card on the field, you're effectively generating 1 energy. And now if you had another action point, you could play another card that costs 0 to 1 energy. But let's just go through the remaining turn. So now it is your end phase, and all cards will unrest at this phase except your AP cards. So now let's say your turn rolls through, and it is now turn 2 for you. So at this point on your start phase, you gain another AP, so you are at 2, and your cards will also unrest at this phase too. So if you had any rested or tap cards, they will unrest at this phase. And after the start phase, there is a movement phase. So at this point of the game, you can move your cards from the energy line to the front line. But in doing so, you lose the energy that they would generate on the energy line since they are on the front line. So the point of cards on the front line is that they can attack your opponent or block during your opponent's turn. And this is a nifty little trick to be able to get some damage in with cards that we have played from our previous turn. But let's just roll that back and say that we haven't moved up any cards. So now we're generating 1 energy, and we use our first AP of the turn to play a 0 cost onto the field, generating 2 energy total now. And in doing so, we can play our 2 cost card onto the front line because we have a total of 2 energy. And then after this is the attack phase. We have no active cards or unrested cards to be able to tap or rest to attack, so we just go through this phase doing nothing. And then keep in mind, during our end phase, all our cards on the field except our AP cards will unrest. And then let's say we are on to our turn 3. So at our start phase, all our cards unrest again, and we gain our 3rd AP. So everything on this turn would resolve in the same order as before. So we'll likely have 3 cards that we can play this turn. So now let's say you are player 2. So everything is pretty much the same. We go through the same order of actions, but on our start phase, on our first turn, we have 2 action points. And then on our second turn, we still have 2 action points, so we don't actually gain an action point on our second turn. So it would be 2 action points on turn 1 and 2 action points on turn 2. And in our turn 3, we go up to 3 action points. So another neat little trick is that during any player's turn during their start phase, they can actually use an action point to extra draw a card. So this is called the AP extra draw. So this is pretty useful in the case where you don't have many cards to play during your turn, and that you would use an unused AP to extra draw at the beginning of the turn to not waste one. So now let's look through the attack phase and see how the sequencing would work. So let's say you are on your attack phase and you have an unrested or active card on the front line, such as this Neon, and you want to deal some damage to your opponent. So you take your active card and then you rest it, and any card that you use to attack with can only target your opponent's life unless you have snipe, but that's not so important now. And then after this, you pass priority to your opponent, and they can either choose to block or take the damage to their life, dealing 1 damage. So we'll go through basic combat rules. So let's say you're attacking with a Neon with 4000 BP, and your opponent chooses to block with an Alice with also 4000 BP. And let's see what happens. So basically, if your BP is the same as their BP, you will actually sideline their opposing card, since attackers will always have the advantage over blockers. But let's check another scenario where your opponent chooses to block with a 5000 BP character, such as this Kaiju number 8. And look here. Their Kaiju blocks the attack, and your Neon loses the battle, but is not sidelined, and their Kaiju wins the battle. And now let's see if you choose to attack with the Neon, but your opponent chooses to not block, and effectively you deal 1 damage to their life. So what happens is that they flip their life, and you only look at the trigger text of the card if that card has one. And then you would apply that trigger effect. And then it goes into your opponent's sideline. And now we looked at mostly cards that only cost 1 action point, but there are actually cards that cost 2 action points. So this is pretty simple. You just need to pay an extra action point to use them, so a total of 2 instead of 1. And other than character cards, we also have event cards. So these are basically, in Magic terms, cards that you play at sorcery speed, and they go into the sideline after they are played. So these are considered powerful effects that don't take up a board slot, since they go directly into the sideline after. And they are all one-time use and can only be played on your turn. And next we have our sight cards, which can only be played on the energy line. And these, unlike characters, cannot move, so they must stay pretty much on the energy line the entire game. And in Magic terms, they are basically artifacts, in that they stay on your energy line and can provide energy. And note that there is a max board size. There is 4 on the front line and 4 on the energy line. And if you want to know what happens if you play more than 4 cards on the field, look at this video here. And lastly, we'll be going over how to perform Raid, which is a powerful mechanic in the game. So you can perform Raid as long as you meet the energy requirements of the card in your hand, and also have the required AP to play your card. So for example, we want to raid on our Rapi, so we play our Raid Rapi because we have 4 energy and we have 1 AP to play. And in doing so, it turns our card active, and we can choose to move it onto the front line. So this is very powerful because it effectively gives our card haste, in that we can attack with it the turn it is played. Alright, thanks for watching, and like and subscribe for more videos.